What I would like to talk about actually is life. The way that we come at writing obituaries is to actually look at. Want me to switch or just need to take care of it? Turn that up. Yeah, it's on. All right. Okay. Great. Almost. All right. There we go. So one of the things that's real necessary about looking at your life when you're thinking about writing your own obituary, I'm going to talk about that first, is that one of the gentlemen was talking about the fact that you really are looking at a theme of your life, but then there are so many themes in your life. And I think that when you look at every decade of your life, you're actually looking at something else that's thematically focused. So when I work with the folks that come in and write their own obituaries with me, we talk about essence rather than theme. So I wish that I had the opportunity to rewrite my mother's obituary. She died about 20 years ago. And now that I've been fooling around with obituaries for quite a long time, I hadn't been at the time, I would do it quite differently. I would start with, Ach du liebe Gott im Himmel, by really dead, because she would always preface everything with, oh my dear God in heaven. And she was always surprised by the turns in life, even though there might have been some guidance along the way that suggested something was coming. So when we talk about a whole life, we're talking about what really is the essence of that? What is the flavor of it? If you looked at the way that they were doing that, when the young pilot, when they were showing those clips of her, there was, I don't know if you noticed the background music, which would not be in your obituary. But the background music to her, even though she died in her 90s, the illustrious part of her life was in her teens, and there was those sweeping violins. And later on, when they did all those very fast clips at the end, they started out with staccato piano, added some strings, and then eventually went to drums when they started. They pulled in the percussion when they started doing something that was much more active. So I always thought that my life should have a whole lot more background music than it has, but one doesn't always get to choose that. So let's talk about essence, because I'd love you to start to think about your own. Whenever I see something like this, I'm always jotting down notes, because there were just so many beautiful things that were said. You could tell that they're all wonderful writers because of the way they speak. The woman there, Margaret, is that her name? She talked about the moving window on world history, and how that becomes a lens and the way that we look back at things. And there's just such luscious language in there. So when you write your own obituary, you have the joy of getting it right, or the joy of fictionalizing the part you didn't like. But hopefully you don't do too much of that, because there's always somebody around that's going to say something about it. But, well, you won't be there. So maybe you won't care about the critics at that point. But one of the things that they talked about in here was about the mythology of a family, and that really is true. There's all kinds of things. My sister and I were at a family gathering recently, and we were telling the same story, but very differently. And it wasn't our story; it was the generation before us. So we heard different things as we came along, and we didn't have an argument about it. Because I just am too nice to argue. But I'm sure you won't believe that. But it was. I just thought it was really interesting how we had very different ideas about the larger pieces of the mythology of the generation before. She thought my mother came to America when she was 19. I knew she came when she was 17. I have all the papers. So we have. The things in our family that we found after my mother died was a box in which my mother had put all of the menus and all of the applications and all of the other memorabilia around her transit from Bremerhaven in Germany to America in 1929. So it started in the fall earlier when her family had been asking for permission to send her and all the paperwork that needed to be done because she was underage, and then all the things that were needed, and the things from Lloyd's of London, who were actually the insurers of the ship, and all kinds of things. Most of it's in German. But when I got to the menus that were on the ship, they were in English on one side and German on the other. Wonderful graphics and little cords and things that were hanging off, and little tassels, and those kinds of memorabilia when you start to pull them together for a life inside and you realize where you came from. When you look at the generations before you, you begin to understand the essence of who you are through that particular lens of seeing what other people brought in your, not necessarily your DNA so much, except for the experience that seems to be a sea that holds you. It's sort of a magnificent fluid vessel that holds you, that then you become some of that and some of it you slough off because it doesn't play. But all of that brings you to the essence of who you are. So when we talk about doing the obituary, you can do it in a straight chronology. So-and-so was born and then did this and that, and maybe went to school, maybe was in the military, maybe got married, maybe had children, maybe had a career, maybe did, maybe didn't. And it all depends on how you want to come at it. But it's much more delightful to read an obituary if you actually look at the whole of a life and what bubbles up out of that. I wrote one for a client of mine, a memoir client, between... he was diagnosed with terminal cancer in July and asked me to write his life story. He was a friend, and I had been his storytelling coach, and he had been my financial advisor. Poor man. And I couldn't get to him until the end of September because of my own schedule. So I went back and forth to Florida and did 42 interviews with colleagues and family and business people and a number of kinds of things. He was heavy into philanthropy, so there were a lot of different kinds of people to talk to. And then he passed away. They said, don't use that. Okay, so he died in the beginning of March. And his family asked me to write the obituary, basically because I knew more about him than anybody else did by then. In those 5 months, I'd spoken to so many people who were important to him and who considered him important in their lives, that I had a wealth of information. So rather than just doing the chronology, I started out with something that went like, when the Catholic schools in the Jacksonville area were being diminished and they were in dire need of being financed, it was John that stepped forward and helped to raise millions and millions of dollars in order to save the downtown schools that had then become part of the greater diocese, the Catholic diocese schools, and they've been expanded something, And when John joined the storytelling industry after a career in waste management, which he left, and people found that John was easy to talk to about financial and important things like that, because artists and finances usually don't mix too well. John stepped up, and when people in his family found themselves needing something, John was always there. And so rather than starting with a chronology of what he had done or not done, it was more important to bring the idea of who he really was, which was a man who believed one thing, and that was that if you express your faith in action, people will know who you are. And so those three things, the way they were much more concise when I wrote them, those three things began the obituary, and then we went through all of the other parts of his lives, including having children with his first wife and adopting some more children, and then that first marriage not working out, and marrying a woman with 3 children, and so his 4 and her 3, and a zillion grandchildren after that, and some great-grandchildren on the way, and this gigantic family, and a reunion every single year with great photographs, because everybody, of course, was given a T-shirt what the color matched to whatever year, so you can tell by the colors of the T-shirts which year it is, and all of that can get woven in a single sentence, So usually I teach people to write their own obituaries, because it makes much more sense to focus on the life that you know right now, and it's an easy enough task if you want to do a little bit of probing and don't want to look at it as just a single chronology. So I have lists and lists of questions. Because I've been teaching memoir for, I don't know, a couple decades, teaching memoir writing, those sentences and questions are very easy to draw from, because I've been doing it for a long time, and we ask the hard questions. It's not what's your favorite thing, but what moves you to practice courage, things like that. In what things have you found the most pride? Who do you love? So we work on deeper questions, and people have a very private time in the memoir classes. So the obituary is sort of a succinct, tiny little memoir. So I think I would rather throw this out to you and see if you have any specific questions, because I'll just blab on and on and on and on. So does anybody have a question? Oh, so you all came with all the answers tonight. Terrific. My kind of crowd. So, all right then, well, I'll just keep talking until somebody throws their hand up and says something. Okay, so in writing somebody else's obituary, what they were talking about, I don't know how they do it, honestly. I don't know how they do it in hours. Having the opportunity to write John's obituary in Florida, I had 5 months to gather information, not an afternoon. So I don't know how they do it, but one of the things that I think is really important, if you do somebody else's obituary, if you've been asked to do it, you don't just do them, that you do check with somebody. I gave the full obituary to his wife, Carol, and said, tell me where I went wrong, because I don't want this to go out into the world without your stamp of approval on it. So, and I do that anyway when I write. When any other the books that I've written, if there's pieces of information in there that need to be checked, I send an email with the exact quote if I'm quoting somebody, and do that. It's just, not only is it a courtesy, it's just plain smart, to make sure that you got it right. So is there anybody that's already written their own obituary? Carol has. Matter of fact, Carol was the first person that said to me, how come you're not teaching obituary writing? This was a number of years ago, and then Janice Belial said, would you come teach obituary writing down at the Anchors? And I said, sure. So I think we've done 4 or 5 groups since then. That was 2 years ago. And we've got another one coming up in August that will be at the Anchors. I think it's every Tuesday. And we usually just run for 2 hours. That's about enough time to focus on your own self with that. But I have to tell you something. Humor has never been a stranger in any of my workshops. But in the obituary writing workshop, I don't understand why we laugh so much. But it becomes very humorous to be right up against the idea of you not being there anymore. And when we do that, somehow it becomes an avenue to the lighthearted aspect of life. And so we get to do some things that are fun. So one of the things that we do is that we work on a 6-word epitaph. So let's do that. So think about your life and see if you can come up with a 6-word epitaph about who you are right now. So if you want to talk to the person next to you and see if you can duke it out, and see if you can do that. I can give you one. Let me see if I can. One that I wrote was Teutonic storyteller, always talked too much. An epitaph, of course, is a thing that would go on the tombstone. It's not necessarily obituary, but it's a succinct thing. And it might be what somebody else thinks about you, so you might want to have that at first and have a chance. I did bring a little list of things that other people have said in class, and if you are in the... Are any of my obituary people in here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? All right. No. I need glasses, hang on. A matriarch who loves to fly. Go into the golden gate. Hallelujah. Listen, speak, pray, and then leave. I'll read you some of mine. But when you'll be able to tell the ones when I was feeling fond of myself, or the times I was feeling humorous about myself. Voice of reason, midwife of story. Write on, that's R-I-G-H-T. Write on, W-R-I-T-E on, and rave on. So write on, rave on. Oak Bluffs, the world. Oak Bluffs. Which is basically how my life has gone so far. I thought for sure I'd never get out of Oak Bluffs, and then one day I ran away when I was 30 and spent 35 years on the road working in America and Europe, and then, of course, the architecture worldwide doesn't compare to the architecture of Oak Bluffs, so I had to come home. Once upon a time, etc. So, anybody think of one for themselves? Oh, so you didn't come here to work? Is that what it is?
No one?
None?
Oh, here we go.
Sarah?
She liked lunch.
She liked lunch. Well, you have to say it twice because it's a 6-word one. So, she liked lunch. She liked lunch.
Go.
You have one, Richard?
No.
Oh.
But I do have a question. I was
Yes.
wondering, maybe you could tell us if you have any favorite obituaries that you've read, other people's obituaries, like maybe of prominent people.
Yeah, actually, the one that they used in here of the man who was the typewriter repairman. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And there's also another one about the lady, I think her name was Mrs. Weinberger, and she was in New York, and she made some wonderful chicken livers and chicken liver pate, I think, and it got very popular in the neighborhood, and then it got a little popular beyond the neighborhood, and then she was trucking it around to beyond the neighborhood in little buckets. And then pretty soon her husband, who was a businessman, said, let's do something about this. And she became a very famous chicken liver person in New York. And the business went on and on and on. She made a fortune. And there was another one that was about the man who invented Haagen-Dazs. And he thought it would be really wonderful if he put an umlaut over an A and put 2 A's in it. It's a completely made up word. It doesn't exist at all. And so he made it up because things European apparently were hot stuff at that point. And so then that went by the boards. It became something that was known and expected and easy to find. And so somebody else ran off with another idea about it and piggybacked on it and called something Frühsenglätscher after that, and did very well as well. But there's these wonderful stories about how people come to these things and how an idea just spins their life into a new place. For me, it was storytelling. I had the plum job in Oak Bluffs. I was a school teacher, and I was teaching kindergarten and first grade. I mean, so what's wrong with lying on your belly on a rug playing puzzles all day? It was pretty good. And then a storyteller walked into my life, and I thought, oh, I am in such trouble here. And I spent 5 years teaching school, getting a repertoire together, and then ran away. I really did run away. Just hopped in the Chevette and took off. I quit my job. I had no health insurance. I just ran away. And that was the pivot point of this particular obituary. I'd never been on a road trip by myself before. Not ever. All alone in the car in America by myself. So I wouldn't even drive after dark for the first couple of weeks until I figured out that there were millions of people in America driving after dark in places that they didn't know. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll be okay too. But I slept in the back of the Chevette, slept in the New Jersey Turnpike, slept in the great big places where all the trucks and the truck stops with the truck drivers. I just pull the Chevette in someplace, sleep in the back. Slept in tobacco fields in Kentucky on the side of the road here and there. Wake up every morning with an entire Chevette all steamed up and say, where the hell am I? And then remember that I had left home and I was on the road and I was on the great adventure. And so the rest of the thing opened up from there. So there's something in your life surely that is a pivot point that speaks to the essence of who you are, who you became. And that's where you go. Any other questions? Yes?
Are there any examples of this type of teaching that would help or could help young people in terms of building more positive self-image?
Their own self-esteem, you mean?
Yeah. Could you repeat the question, Susan?
Oh, sure.
Briefly?
Is there any? Let me see if I got this straight. Okay. Is there any example of that kind of writing that would help young people, with their senses of self and then a positive sense of self? I don't know. I think you have to sort of dig for it. But every time I work with somebody on a life story, I'm finding that every single one of them is that kind of writing. I don't know if there's a collection, but there should be. Maybe I did some recording for Chicken Soup for the Soul. I was one of the audio voices for them at one point. And so maybe some of those do, but you might have a career change here. This could be your next big project. So it's a great idea though. If we all got together and just wrote down the things that helped us find who we are and gave us the courage to step out of what was, or to step out of what might have been holding us back. Salivating, just kind of making a little bit of drool over here. So let's go get a grant. All right. And think about it. Does anybody else know of a collection of writing like that? We're all coming up empty. You're the quietest bunch I have dealt with in a while.
Doreen had a question.
Doreen.
Can you shout it out?
Doreen up there.
My question is, if you write your own obituary, does that not eliminate the possibility of hearing other people's voices about you?
Well, you're not going to hear them anyway. Unless, of course, if there is anything to the life everlasting, perhaps you can tune in. I don't know. So, I think the point is that if you're going to write your obituary, you let somebody in the family know, or you put it in writing that you want your obituary that you wrote to be used, and you can leave blanks in there that said, you don't know, when the last day is, so, she died from, if you want it in there about what you died from or not. The thing that's really interesting about getting it out into the newspapers is the Vineyard is, the two papers on the Vineyard might be some of the last ones anywhere that allow you to do that for free. It costs to put an obituary in a newspaper generally, and it also costs a great deal to put a photograph in, but not here. And there are, I think the Times is 1,000 words and the Gazette is 600. Don't quote me on that, but it's not any more than that. However, you know that sometimes you open up the newspaper and it's way more than that. So it depends on your prominence, I think, and on the circumstances of the life and the death, about how much space there might be. And I'm sure that the editors have at things, because I've noticed a few obituaries that are not completely grammatically correct, but they're in a voice, and you don't want to mess with that voice, so much. And hey, Richard, your mic's on. Yeah, Gene.
Hi there. I had thought they'd included in this film, but I was so struck by the obituaries that the Times wrote after 2001.
Mm-hmm.
That really captured me at the time, and I've been, interested.
Did you collect them? Did you keep them?
I did some of them.
Well, that would be an interesting thing to see. Yeah,
They would not. Many of those people were not at their. They had lived their arc of their life.
Mm-hmm.
It was very moving.
Yeah. Well, and without knowing that the arc was over. Yeah, I think that happens to so many of us. I mean, we look in. There's something about the water on the Vineyard, apparently, because people live very, very long lives here. There are constantly folks in the 90s and some. I remember when Peggy Freiberg died, she had done her last live public poetry reading at 106 the year before, and we don't all get to do that, but be creative and public speaking right up to the end. Any more questions? Yes?
How far did you get in the Chevette?
Oh, I got pretty far. I ended up working America and Europe for quite a while. I worked for the Department of Defense dependent schools in Germany, our Department of Defense. So in Germany and Italy and England, and I did some work in Austria and France, and I was just lucky. If you're in the right place at the right time, and the person that sees you and admires what you do has the potential for hiring you later on. It's one of those kinds of delicious combination of events that keeps you going forward. So, yeah, it was great. I had a wonderful time. Met some incredible people. Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you for the things you brought to our attention. I feel inspired to get going on doing something that's newsworthy.
Yeah, do something that's newsworthy. Well, that's what they said, that it wasn't whether or not you were worthy of being spoken about, but whether or not what you did was newsworthy. Yeah, and so that's an interesting take on the whole thing. Yes, sir?
Do you know the story? I can't remember if it was Nobel or Pulitzer who read an obituary that was incorrect on himself and realized that he hadn't done enough with his life and started the prize. And I can't remember which one it was.
I don't know, but the sister movie to this one that came out this year with Shirley MacLaine in it, which is called The Last Word, is exactly that. She gets to a point in her life where she really wishes she had lived things a little bit differently, and then she goes about making some changes. Have you seen The Last Word?
Yes.
It was wonderful. I loved it. Did you all like it?
Yes.
Yeah, I just thought it was delightful. She was pretty sweet in there. So, any other questions? Yes?
I can't resist, Susan. Did you pick up any hitchhikers on your drive across the country here today?
No, I did not, but I did get a number of marriage proposals and indecent proposals. There were all kinds of things up there. But I was actually in a pretty benign setting, though. I was going from storytelling festival to storytelling festival. They're pretty sedate folks for the most part. But I was kidding about all the other stuff. No, I did not pick up any hitchhikers. I didn't think it was a wise thing to do at that point in the career.
That was me in Nebraska.
It was you on the Platte River. Was that you? Yeah.
So you were talking about the essence, trying to grab the essence. So I just thought about my mom, who was a figure in Vineyard Haven. So I just looked up her obit, and the headline, and I want to read 2 sentences. That's it.
Yeah.
Judy McIntosh, known for riding her bicycle in Vineyard Haven, was the headline. And the piece that I wanted to read was, she was a well-known figure in Vineyard Haven, riding her bicycle and wearing her ever-present straw hats adorned with flowers. That was the essence of my mom. So somebody did this, I'm not sure who it was.
Somebody got her, yeah. It's lovely, and one of the things that is so nice is if somebody's been watching you over time, in a good way, that can actually describe, who you are and what you've done. I actually, on nights that I can't sleep, I actually write eulogies in my head. I compose eulogies for people that I care about, and they don't ever come out the same way. If the person does die, I've had the opportunity to do that, to actually write a eulogy for someone that I had written one for in the night, and they don't come out the same way at all. But it's an interesting way of stepping out of yourself when you're having trouble sleeping, is to think about the most magnificent things about somebody that you care about and what you would love to be able to say publicly about somebody. So eulogy is not an obituary, they're very different. But the eulogy has that celebratory aspect to it, which it gives you an opportunity that you might not have later on to ever say it out loud, but in your own mind, you can imagine that you're doing it.